75 or 100 years from now, we'll all be using solar and power and wind power and whatever. Our problem is we don't have 75 or 100 years. We have to make it happen very, very fast. And probably the only way to do that, at least that anyone's come up with, is to put a stiff price on carbon, on fossil fuel, that reflects the damage it does in the atmosphere. If we were able to do that, then we would see much more rapid movement towards solar power. Every time you raise, the price of coal-fired power a penny or two or three, the number of projects, the number of solar panels and wind turbines and things that are economically viable goes straight up. It's an almost linear equation, and it is probably that sort of lever of the market, the only thing big enough we have to pull right now in order to get the change that we need. The problem is that setting that price on carbon as a planet, well, there's all kinds of problems that we could discuss at great length, and many of them stem from the fact of the incredible economic inequality that troubles this world already and that makes action very difficult. But the biggest problem, the central problem, the reason that we're not doing that is the incredible political power of the fossil fuel industry to prevent change. They have more money than any industry, any human enterprise ever conducted. 8 of the 10 largest firms in the world are in the fossil fuel industry. ExxonMobil made more money last year than any company in the history of money. They're able, by taking a very small amount of that money, to influence the political system in many countries, most potently perhaps America, influence the political system enough to delay action. And delay is all they really need. They want to continue as long as possible making money on the same scale that they're making it now. And putting a price on carbon is a threat to that business model, because the reason that they are so profitable is that they are allowed to use the atmosphere as an open sewer into which to dump for free their waste. That's what climate change is. It's fossil fuel dumping its waste into the atmosphere. And because they do it for free, there's no incentive to find other things like solar or wind, or to conserve with any great vigilance. That's what this battle is about. That's what Copenhagen was about, and what the battle in the US Congress was about this year. And so far, the fossil fuel industry is winning every battle. They're winning it in part because, of course, most of us don't really want to change very much. Those of us in the fossil fuel burning world are kind of used to burning fossil fuel, used to the sets of habits, institutions, infrastructures that we inhabit, and so they're able to play on that change as scary and threatening, and persuade people to vote against politicians that might change the ground rules. And they're also able, simply by the direct application of money, to corrupt the system over and over and over again in many, many, many places. Once again, there's no use, I think, being at all sentimental or overly rosy about what the problem is, what the opposition looks like, how strong it is. It's clearly strong enough at the moment to be winning pretty much every fight, and winning them pretty easily. The US Senate this year, faced with a very, very moderate, very, very tame climate bill. A bill so tame it really wouldn't have done very much except get the process finally started. Faced with that, the fossil fuel industry spent upwards of $500 million and was able to prevent the Senate from even taking a vote on that bill. And given the results of the election that we expect tomorrow, it's quite probable they won't take a vote on anything like it for the next couple of years either. And given the role of the United States as the source of 40% of the greenhouse gases historically in the atmosphere, it's very unlikely that we're going to get any world action on this until the U.S. at least agrees to play some kind of responsible role. So at the moment, we're losing, and losing badly. That's the bottom line. The question is, how might we change that? And that's the question that's haunted me for a long time, and in the last few years sort of had the effect of starting to turn me from a writer and a thinker about these things, someone whose first book, The End of Nature, was far more rooted in kind of philosophical discussion of these questions than anything else, into someone who's trying to learn how to be an activist on these issues. We're kind of making it up as we go along. I don't really know what we're doing as we try to build these movements, but since no one else was really building them on a global scale, we figured that we better try. And I'm going to tell you just a few stories about that to give you some sense of, well, really to give you some sense, I'll show you some pictures in a minute, of what your colleagues and allies and comrades look like around the world, to give you some sense that there is a possibility, anyway, of a movement emerging. The reason we need a movement, I think, is very simple. We're never going to have as much money as the fossil fuel industry. And if we continue to compete, if we have to compete in that currency, we will lose. We're going to have to figure out some other currencies to use, and the only one that I can think of is sort of bodies and spirit and creativity, political movements. On the other hand, it's a daunting prospect to try to build a political movement, especially a global one. We've done some work, myself and 7 students of mine at Middlebury College in Vermont had done some work in the United States in 2007 and built a pretty good little movement that managed to coordinate about 1,400 rallies around the country and convince Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who were then competing for the presidency, to dramatically stiffen their stand on global warming and energy. So we were pretty pleased with ourselves. That was the spring of 2007. But right after that happened, in the summer of 2007, was when all hell broke loose. It's when the Arctic began to melt so furiously. And by the time the summer of 2007 was over, there was 25% less ice in the Arctic than there had been before. I spent much of that summer getting phone calls from scientists I'd known for a quarter century, and they'd always been worried, but now they were really kind of panicked. Change was happening at a kind of off-the-charts level, no matter what physical system you looked at, and they were kind of desperate for getting the message out. By the time the summer was over, it was clear to us that we were going to have to talk about much more ambitious targets than we've been talking about before, and that we were going to have to speak globally, that just as we're not really going to solve this problem one light bulb at a time, we're really not going to solve it one country at a time either, though certain countries, including the U.S., are key to making things happen. We're going to have to work one planet at a time. For people trying to learn how to do political organizing, that was a kind of daunting realization, because global organizing is difficult work, if for no other reason than the globe is a big place, and that people across it insist on speaking their own languages everywhere. And that makes it very hard to figure out how, even, Coca-Cola and McDonald's, who have, infinite resources, have a difficult time figuring out how to spread their message around the world. So, we were both horrified and a little elated in the winter of 2008, January 2008, when our foremost climatologists a team led by Jim Hansen at NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the U.S., when they published a paper saying, we now know enough about climate to put a numerical value on our crisis. The number instantly became the most important number in the world. It was 350. 350 parts per million carbon dioxide. They said at any level above 350 parts per million CO2, we can't have, and this is how they put it in the abstract of their peer-reviewed paper, we can't have a planet similar to the one on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. Okay? That's strong language for scientists to use. And stronger still when you know that outside now in Stockholm and in San Francisco and in every place else around the world, the atmosphere is already about 390 parts per million CO2 and rising about 2 parts per million per year, i.e. we're already way, way too hot. Not a problem for anyone's kids or grandkids, a problem that's breaking over our heads at the moment. Too high already. That's why the Arctic is melting. It's why Russia's catching on fire. It's why Pakistan is drowning. It's why people in Lahore are trying to find hospital beds today to get out of the way of dengue. And it's why we need to act very, very urgently. So that was the horrifying part of that paper. It was truly scary. To read it was to understand that there was no way we were going to prevent global warming, only try to keep it from getting any worse than it has to get. The kind of thrilling part for us as organizers was that the number gave us something to work with. You wouldn't normally try to organize people around a kind of wonky scientific data point. It's a difficult task. But Arabic numerals have one great use. They're the same everywhere. So 350 means the same thing, in Scandinavia and in China and in wherever you go, all right? So we decided that would become the rallying point for our campaign. That was our advantage. It was a good thing we had some advantage, because otherwise not much. We had myself and 7 young people. There were 22 at the time. 7 was an okay number because there are 7 continents, so each one took one. The guy who got the Antarctic also got the internet, because it's sort of its own continent. And off we went to work, and we quickly started finding allies. And some of them we found very